Hello, folks. Welcome back to the AA Book Stories. I'm your host, Jason. I'd like to start off this video by the people who brought you this video and sponsored it. It's James 414 Vape Sales. They're located in Mount Vernon, Kentucky, just off of 461. I'm sure you can Google their address. They just sponsored the video, and I like to give them a shout out. Alright, this morning we're going to be reading The Missing Link, which is the first story in part 2 of the Big Book stories in the back of the Alcohol Anonymous book. This is kind of a little prequel to it. It's called They Stopped in Time. Among today's AA members, many have never reached the advanced stages of alcoholism, though given time they all might have. Most of these fortunates have had little or no acquaintances with deliriums, hospitals, asylums, or jails. Some were drinking heavily, and there might have been occasional serious episodes, but many drinking had been little more than a sometimes uncontrollable nuisance. Seldom have any of these lost either health, business, family, or friends. Why do men and women like these join AA? The 17 who now tell their experiences answer that question. They saw they had become actual or potential alcoholics, even though no serious harm had yet been done. They realized that repeated lack of drinking control when they really wanted control was a fatal symptom that spelled problem drinking. This plus mounting emotional disturbances convinced them that compulsive alcoholism already had them, that complete ruin would be just a question of time. Seeing this danger, they came to AA. They realized that in the end, alcoholism could be as mortal as cancer. Certainly no sane man would wait for a malignant growth to become fatal before seeking help. Therefore, these 17 AAs and hundreds of thousands like them have been saved years of infinite suffering. They sum it up something like this. We didn't wait for the bottom because, thank God, we could see the bottom. Actually, the bottom came up and hit us. That sold us on Alcohol Anonymous. Alright, this is chapter 1 of part 2 of the Big Book stories in the back of the Alcohol Anonymous book. He looked at everything as the cause of his unhappiness except alcohol. When I was 8 or 9 years old, my life suddenly became very difficult. Feelings began to emerge that I did not understand. Depression crept into my life as I started to feel alone, even in crowded rooms. In fact, life didn't make much sense to me at all. It was hard to say what sparked all of this, to pinpoint one fact or event that changed everything forever. The fact of the matter was, I was miserable from early on in life. It was all confusing. I remember isolating on the playgrounds, watching all the other children laughing, playing, and smiling, and not feeling like I could relate at all. I felt different. I didn't feel as I was one of them. Somehow, I thought I didn't fit in. My school marks soon reflected these feelings. My behavior and attitude seemed to become troublesome to everyone around me. I soon began spending more time in the principal's office than in the classroom. My parents, perplexed by such an unhappy son, began having difficulties. My house was soon filled with sounds of arguments and yelling about how to handle me. I found that running away from home could supply me with some sort of temporary solace until, of course, the police would find me and bring me back to my house and my worried parents. At the time, I started seeing therapists and specialists, each with a different theory and a different solution. They conducted special tests and interviews designed to get to the root of my troubles and came to the conclusion that I had a learning disability and was depressed. The psychiatrist started me on some medications, and the problems in school started to clear up. Even some of the depression began to ease up for a bit. However, something still seemed fundamentally wrong. Whatever the problem, I soon found what appeared to be the solution to everything. At age 15, I traveled with my family to Israel. My brother was to be bar mitzvahed at the top of the Masada. There was no legal drinking age, so I found it quite easily to walk into a bar and order a drink. New Year's Eve fell in the middle of our trip, and since the Jewish calendar celebrates a different New Year's than the Gregorian calendar, the only celebration was being held in the American sector of the university. I got drunk for the first time that night, and it changed everything. A stop at a local bar began the evening. I ordered a beer from the waitress. As I took the first sip, something was immediately different. I looked around at the people drinking and dancing, smiling and laughing. All of them were much older than I. Suddenly, I somehow felt I belonged. From there, I made my way to the university, where I found hundreds of other Americans celebrating New Year's Eve. Before the night was over, I started a fight with a number of college-age drunken fellows and returned to the hotel still stinking drunk and riddled with bruises. Oh yes, what a grand evening it was. I fell in love that night with a beverage. Returning to the States, I was determined to continue my newfound love affair. I found trying to convince my friends to join me, but I was met with resistance. Still determined, I set out to find new friends, friends who could help me maintain this fantastic solution to my most desperate problems. My escapees started out as a weekend pursuit and progressed into a daily obsession. At first, it took several beers to get me drunk to my satisfaction. However, within 3 years, it took a fifth and a half of vodka, a bottle of wine, and several beers in the evening's time to satisfactorily black me out. I would obtain alcohol by any means necessary. That meant lying, stealing, and cheating. My motto was, if you felt like I did, you'd have to get drunk too. As these feelings of hopelessness and depression progressed, so did my drinking. Thoughts of suicide became more and more frequently. It felt as if things were never going to change. Progress with my therapist almost came to a complete halt. The hopelessness that was compounded by the fact that the one thing that was bringing me relief, the one thing I continued to take on and take my pain away, was ultimately destroying me. The end, I feared, was close. My last semester in high school marked my bottom. It was everyday drinking then. Since I had already been accepted to college, I consciously decided to make that my last semester one big party. But it was no fun at all. I was miserable. I graduated narrowly and took a job at a local garage. It was difficult to manage my drinking and a job since they were both full-time. But I conceded all kinds of lies to ensure nothing would interfere with my drinking. After being repeatedly reprimanded at work for being late in the mornings, excuse me, I made up a story to hide the fact that I was always hungover. I told my manager that I had cancer and needed to go to the doctor for treatment every morning. I would say whatever I needed to say to protect my drinking. More often, I was having these little moments of clarity. Times I knew for sure I was an alcoholic. Times when I was looking at the bottom of the glass and asking myself, why am I doing this? Something had to give. Something had to change. I was suicidal. Evaluating every part of my life for what could be wrong, it accumulated in one last night of drinking and staring at the problem. It made me sick to think about it, and even sick to continue drinking anyway. I was forced to look at my drinking as a chief suspect. The next day I went to work, late as usual, and all day long I could not stop thinking about this very real problem. I could go no further. Thinking about this, what has happened to me. Therapy hadn't fixed my life at all. All those sessions, I was still miserable. I might as well just kill myself, drink my way into oblivion. In one last desperate fight for a solution, I reviewed my life, searching for the missing link. Had I left out some critical bit of information that would lead me to a breakthrough, making it possible for my life to become just a little more bearable? No, there was nothing, except, of course, my drinking. The next morning I went to see my therapist. I told him I decided to quit therapy because after 8 years it wasn't working. I decided to tell him how I'd been searching through my life for the missing link and had come up with only one thing I had never told him, that I drank. He began asking me questions. He asked about quantities, frequencies, and what I drank. Before he was even halfway through, I broke down and began sobbing. I cried, "Do you think I have a problem with drinking?" He replied, "I think that's quite obvious." Then I asked, "Do you think I'm an alcoholic?" He answered, "You're going to have to find out for yourself." He pulled a list of Alcohol Anonymous meetings out from his desk drawer. He had already highlighted the young people's meetings. He told me to go home and not to drink at all for the rest of the day, and he would call me at 9 p.m. and wanted to hear that I hadn't taken a drink. It was rough, but I went home and locked myself in my room, sweating it out until he called. He asked if I had had a drink. I told him that I had not, and asked what I should do next. He told me to do the same thing tomorrow, except tomorrow I should go to the first meeting on the list he had highlighted. The next day I went in for my first meeting of Alcohol Anonymous. I was 18 years old. In the parking lot, I sat in the car for about 15 minutes before the meeting started, trying to work up the courage to go in and face myself. I remember finally working up the nerve to open the door and get out, only to close the door, dismissing the notion of going into the meeting as ridiculous. This dance of decisiveness went on about 15 times before I went in. Had I not gone in, I believe I would not be alive today. The room was very smoky and filled with apparently happy people. Finding a seat in the back, I sat down and tried to make sense of the format. When the chairperson asked if there was any newcomers present, I looked around and saw hands go up, but I certainly wasn't ready to raise my hand and draw attention to myself. The meeting broke up into small groups, and I followed one of the groups down the hall and took a seat. They opened a book and read a chapter titled Seven Steps. Step 7. After the reading, they went around the table for comments, and for the first time in my life, I found myself surrounded by people I could relate with. I no longer felt as if I was a total misfit, because here was a room full of people who felt precisely as I did, and a major weight had been lifted. I happened to be the last chair around the table to speak, and confused by the reading, all I could say was, "What the heck are shortcomings?" A couple of members realized I was there for my first meeting, took me downstairs, and sat down with me and outlined the program. I recall very little of what I said. I remember telling these members this program they outlined sounded like just what I needed, but I didn't think I could stay sober for the rest of my life. Exactly how was I supposed to not drink if my girlfriend breaks up with me or my best friend dies, or even through happy times like graduations, weddings, and birthdays? They suggested I could just stay sober one day at a time. They explained it might be easier to set my sights on 24 hours in front of me and to take on the sober situations when and if they ever arrived. I decided to give sobriety a try one day at a time, and I've done it that way ever since. When I entered Alcohol Anonymous, I had done some damage physically and a bouquet of mental quirks, and spiritually was bankrupt. I knew I was powerless over alcohol, and I needed to be open-minded towards what people suggested for recovery. However, when it came to spirituality, I fought it nearly every step of the way. Although raised in an ethnic and religious Jewish household, I was agnostic, and the very resistance to anyone or anything that I perceived as being imposing religious beliefs. I was surprised Alcohol Anonymous suggested something different. The idea that religion and spirituality were not one and the same was a new notion. My sponsor asked me that I merely remain open-minded to the possibility that there was a higher power greater than myself, one of my own understanding. He assured me that no person was going to impose a belief system on me, that it was a personal matter. Reluctantly, I opened my mind to the fact that maybe, just maybe, there was something to this spiritual lifestyle. Slowly but surely, I realized there was indeed a power greater than myself, and I soon found myself with a full-time God in my life and following a spiritual path that didn't conflict with any personal religious convictions. Following this spiritual path made a major difference in my life. It seemed to fill that lonely hole that I used to feel with alcohol. My self-esteem improved dramatically, and I knew happiness and security as I had never known before. I started to see the beauty and the usefulness in my own existence and tried to express my gratitude through helping others in whatever ways I could. A confidence and faith entered my life and unraveled a plan for me that was bigger and better than anything I'd ever imagined. It wasn't easy. It never has been easy, but it gets so much better. Since the first meeting, my life has completely changed. 3 months into the program, I started college. While many of my college classmates were experimenting with alcohol for the first time, I was off at meetings in AA, get-togethers, and becoming active in service work and developing relationships with God, family, friends, and loved ones. I rarely thought twice about this. It was what I wanted and needed to do. Over the last 7 years, nearly everything I thought I could not stay sober through had happened. Indeed, sobriety and life are full of ups and downs. Occasionally, depression crept back into my life and requires outside help. However, this program has provided me with the tools to stay sober through the death of my best friends, relationships, and good times like birthdays, weddings, and graduations. Life has exponentially better than it ever was before. I'm living out the life I used to fantasize about, and I have a whole lot of work still in front of me. I have hope to share and love to give, and I just keep going one day at a time, living this adventure called life. Thank you, folks. That's the first chapter. Until next time, one AA time, one AA place, and one AA channel.